Well, my Taoiseach is with us now, Bertie Ahern, of course. Hello to you, Mr. Ahern. It's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us. When did you know that you'd achieved a great thing?
Well, I think about 5 minutes after we signed it, I finally believed that the parties agreed, because it was a long haul, and I suppose we had been up and down so many good bits and bad bits, and in the end, the last few days were hectic, and about 4 times I think we thought we were there, and about 4 times we thought we'd failed. So it was not until that meeting where we all sat around the table together and George Mitchell finally asked people to give their endorsement.
5:30 on Good Friday. If that agreement hadn't been signed by then, what would that have meant for that weekend in the province?
I think what would have happened, Kay, is that there would have been a huge disappointment, but all the security indications at the time were that we would quickly revert back to the old ways of violence again. And, we had seen that the previous Christmas, when there was a break at the Christmas period, and we'd seen violence from both sides. So, and the big concern I had at the time, thinking about it over the last few weeks, was, the trouble started in the 60s, and there were 2 real attempts to try and find a solution. Once in 74, that failed, and the next one was 85, 11 years later. And when that failed, then we had to wait 13 years more. So the difficulty was that we could have been in for another decade. And that was certainly the security the briefings at the time, that we would revert back to the past again. So thankfully that didn't happen. Thankfully we've had 25 years of peace. There has been some low-level violence, and there's been some, high-level violence, where some killings, but not a lot, thank God. And unfortunately, the political position has not been as stable. Okay, it's that's been up and down. We've had a number of protracted delays in the institutions in Belfast, and we're in the middle of one of those at the moment. So hopefully we'll get to the end of that later on this year.
Yeah, Bertie, let me take you back a quarter of a century again now, though, if I may. Are there conversations during those protracted negotiations that you never shared with others?
Well, I suppose they've been fairly well aired, but there were certainly difficult. Actually, there are things you find out all the time. For example, I did a podcast recently, one of the radio stations, where I tried to go back and interview all those that were alive, that were involved 25 years ago. And of course, I spoke to George Mitchell and Bill Clinton and Tony Blair that you've mentioned, and all the other party leaders. And I spoke to John Hume's son, but he gave me an account of, that when John Hume went to meet the Provisional IRA Army Council, how that happened, and the fact that he was driven around in a van for a day, which was quite amazing. And then I also learned from David Trimble's wife that on the Tuesday of the final, that was Holy Week, was just a few days before the deadline on Good Friday, that David Trimble had actually written to the Prime Minister saying that he couldn't make the deal and he was really going to get out of here. So you pick up bits all the time that I didn't know.
Didn't mention Mo Mowlam. How big a role did Mo Mowlam play? God rest her soul. Very unconventional woman, wasn't she?
She was. Mo was as tough as any word you want to mention, because she was tough, but she was great fun and great sense of humour. But she didn't take any nonsense from anybody, and particularly men who tried to be a bit bully boys. And she would kick the slippers off and put the feet up. And when she got really mad, she'd take off. That time she was suffering from cancer, and suffering bad with cancer. She'd throw the hairpiece off and she'd give them a tongue lashing. But she was brave. She went into the prisons at a crucial time. She went in and spoke to the royalist prisoners to calm them down and explain where we were at. And that was a really big decision. It wasn't one that was advised to her, but she felt that it was a good thing to do. I don't think if you were to take 100 people, I think 99 of them wouldn't have done that, but it was the right thing to do. I supported her, and it was very helpful.
What were the standout moments for you, particularly? I mean, Tony Blair, not a time for sound bites, of course, but he could feel the hand of history on his shoulder. What about you?
Yeah, I think one of the memories I'll always have is the last night or two there were all night sessions, and you went into the negotiating rooms, and you had half of the teams were literally asleep on their desk, and the other half were absolutely jaded and walking out into the gardens for air. But I suppose that the one I always remember at about 5 in the morning on Good Friday, I decided I needed some air, and I just had finished a long session with Tony Blair, with Martin McGuinness, the late Martin McGuinness, and Jerry Adams, and I went out a door. I thought it was safe enough. I saw a garden, so I pushed the security door and walked out to be met by 3 or 4 RUC men with submachine guns. Anyway, they gladly decided I wasn't a terrorist, so I got through that, but I did get a fright.
Yeah, I bet you did. I bet you did. 30 years of violence before that, 3,500 lives lost. It takes a special kind of politician, and as you said, there were several of you that can talk peace with terrorists.
Yeah, it was, it was a horrendous time in the north here. All the time from I was in school, from '68, I was in my last year in second level, and it went on and on and on, and nobody really ever got tired of it, because one event was even more horrendous than the other. And every day it was the bombings. There were nearly 40,000 people seriously injured, not to mind the 3,700 were died, and the damage, the buildings, just the no tourism, no investments, very little happening. Young people going abroad for their education rather than staying at home. Like it was a horror story, and I think in the end of the day, there wasn't much option really. To Tony Blair and I followed the Mitchell principles that effectively meant that you couldn't engage in violence and be involved in peace talks. And that was a bit of a grey area. We did our best to try and make sure the violence stopped totally, but that wasn't always possible. So in football terms, we were given red cards to anyone or any party that was associated with anyone who was involved in violence. But it was the right thing to have inclusive talks which pulled everybody in, including the parties that had previously been involved with groups who are involved in violence, and to be comprehensive in terms of the issues we dealt with, prisoners and demilitarization of the North, changing the criminal justice system, reform of the policing. They were all huge issues, and some of them we got very right, some of them not so right. Decommissioning went on too long, went on for 5 years before we got that. But overall, I think, Northern Ireland is a better place. It's not perfect. There are still outstanding issues, and I suppose after so much violence, it takes time. And of course, I should always mention the legacy, the people who lost their lives, and their families are still trying to get justice.
Sure. President Clinton made a big difference 25 years ago. Can President Biden get all sides round the table for Stormont?
I think his words tonight when he arrives, and tomorrow will be important. I think anywhere in the world it'd always be glad to welcome the president. I think my regret today is but that he would have been, I think, addressing Stormont today and talking to the politicians, but Stormont is in suspension, so I think that's a big pity. He'll obviously see the party leaders at a university opening in Belfast tomorrow, a tremendous new University of Ulster wing, and I'm sure he'll talk to them there. But it's not ideal. There's still work to be done, and hopefully his words might help politicians to see some new light.
Okay, just before I let you go, let's look to the future. What about President Ahern? How does that fit for size?
I don't know about all of that. I'm getting older, Kay, and
Aren't we all, Bertie? But do you want to be president?
we'll have to see how it plays out. But anyway, in the meantime, I'll concentrate in trying to do all the other things I'm involved in, and it's a few years away before that even arises. So I'll think about it then.
Yeah, it's not a no, is it? Enjoy the next few days, and saving the knowledge that you brought about peace with others for the last 25 years. Good on you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kay. Good to see you.
And you too.